So let me,
Here we go. We are going live. And hi, I'm here to talk today about a really cool tool for getting ad hoc data from the web. And I'm here with Nick Stone. And do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
yeah, so my name is Nick Stone. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Crul. And, we've been working on something pretty cool to kind of interact with web data and get it from the web to really pretty much any destination with some processing and transforming along the way. And I'm excited to share some more and show you what we've been up to.
And you want to talk about your background and like how you got to where you're at, like your origin story?
Yeah, sure. So I joined um, Splunk right out of university. Um, I studied computer science at UC Berkeley, and then joined Splunk. I was working on the partner integrations team, which is where kind of some of the thoughts behind Crawl actually originated. So the partner integrations team was a place where I was working on a lot of technical integrations with people who wanted to send data to Splunk or integrate with Splunk in some way, whether that was through an alert or some sort of action or something like that. And then through my time at Splunk, I met Carl, the co-founder of Krull, and he was an early stage employee at Splunk. Really talented engineer and a great person, and we became close friends. We both left Splunk. I think Carl left a little bit before me. I left, and I'd always kind of wanted to start my own thing, and we got to talking, and we were both kind of wanting to do the same thing. So we thought we'd work together, and that's where Carl kind of came from. Um,
Cool.
yeah,
Cool. And yeah, maybe we can just get into it because it seems like your demo, from what I've seen, is pretty cool, and I bet a lot of people would be interested in checking it out.
yeah. I'm excited to share. If you're Uh, we're planning on distributing this, towards the end of November. End of November, mid-December is when this should be available. But I'm happy to kind of give a preview and work through a few use cases, a few things that we've put together to demonstrate what we can do. So
Okay.
let me pull that up. All right, so this is Crul. The main sort of interaction with Crul is through this query bar, which allows us to construct queries which interact with web content. So web content would be APIs or actual web pages, and I'll show examples of both of those. But what this might look like is interacting with an API like the GitHub API. So the use case that we're going to try and solve here is, let's look at the public members of a GitHub organization. In this case, we're looking at Netflix, and we want to look at their GPG keys, and we want to see which ones are expired or which ones don't have an expiration date, which are still available through kind of the public API. So the first step would be to run this API command. And running this API command is similar to running a curl command or something like that. But what we're going to do is transform that data set into this tabular structure. And sometimes we'll have to do some normalization operations or some flattening operations. But almost always we can turn JSON or XML API responses into this tabular structure. And what's cool about this tabular structure is it works well with the rest of the Crul language. So what that might look like would be a second stage that we can add to our query. And this stage is going to run another API request on a different endpoint. In this case, we're looking at the user's GPG keys endpoint. But what's important here is we have this login token. And this login token essentially means that we're going to take the login value in each row and make an API request for every single row. So this is the equivalent of for loop or a while loop if you were writing a script to do something like this. But this is going to happen semi-asynchronously. We have domain policies and things in place that prevent how many requests we make to a particular domain at a time. But those are configurable. But the end result of running this query is all of the public keys for those users that are available. And from here, we can do some additional processing and enriching of this data. So an example of what that might look like would be running this timestamp command. So this timestamp command is just going to add a timestamp to each row. So we can take this API request, which is semi-static or doesn't have a timestamp associated with it. Now we can add a timestamp, which would be useful for a time series data system or something like that. And we can see that timestamp over here. So this is the current timestamp. There are other timestamps in here. And since we wanted to find expired keys, what we can do is run more of a logical operation here, where we're going to compare the current timestamp to an expired timestamp that was in the original request. And then finally, we'll run one more command that's just going to extract out two of the columns. So one of the columns will be this emails or the email address, and the second will be the expiration date. And the result of this query is essentially all of the users that have either expired keys or keys that don't have an expiration date, both of which are something we might want to look into a little bit further. From here, we could download this as a CSV file or a JSON file, or we could send it along to another system, which I'll demonstrate in a second. But really what we're showing here is dealing with API content, dealing with this web content, bringing it in, exploring it, expanding on it, and then turning it into this simplified sort of usable data set. Another example in the API world would be interacting with the Twitter API. So here we're looking at this tweets search API that allows us to kind of put in this free form text query. In this case, I'm using this NASA as my query. So as I mentioned, Crul and I worked on a lot of technical integrations in the past, and there are some patterns that emerge when dealing with APIs. So dealing with things like credentials, dealing with things like pagination, dealing with things like scheduling of these kinds of jobs. And we tried to build those into our language. So as an example, we can provide a bearer token, or we can set arbitrary headers. And this syntax here allows us to interact with a credentials vault that we have built into Crul. So this allows you to essentially create and upload credentials to Crul that you can then use within the query pipeline. Same thing with pagination. So these are just flags that you can use to control this API command. And in this case, we're going to be getting the first 5 pages of tweets from the Twitter API. Then we're going to do a secondary sort of enrichment on those tweets to get back the usernames of the usernames and description and things like that. And then we'll do a join on the 2 data sets, so we kind of get the enriched set of tweets. So really running this query is an example of dealing with a slightly larger data set. Obviously, we could increase the number of pages that we're pulling in. Here we're just dealing with the first 500 results that we get back. But here you'll see we have our username, name, description, and the actual tweet. And what's cool with Crul is really the simplicity of getting it to a third-party store. So I'll show you what that looks like in the language. The first part would be to write this freeze command and then write it to a pre-configured store. So just like with credentials, we have stores, which are essentially just ways of interacting with a service, with a third-party destination, like an S3 bucket or a Kafka topic. So when I write this freeze command, what's essentially going to happen is I'm going to write this data set to, in this case, this Splunk prod store that I've configured, which is just a local Splunk instance that I have running. And once this query completes, I can run a query within Splunk and get back the tweets that I essentially just sent in. So that's a pretty cool way of interacting with these third-party data stores and really going from API requests, web content, a little bit of processing and enrichment to writing it to a third-party store. But when you actually want to productionize this or turn this into a customized feed, we have the concept of scheduled stores. And these scheduled stores allow you to write to any of the stores that we kind of support out of the box. We have a pretty good number of them. But there's a couple additional things. So first of all, we probably want a scheduling interval. So maybe we want to run this one every 10 minutes. Next thing would be, how do we deal with diffs? So if I'm getting a bunch of tweets, do I want to send that whole set of tweets, or do I only want to send new ones? So we have a couple different ways of dealing with diffs, essentially, whether or not we're sending new tweets along. And then once I configure this query, essentially every 10 minutes, I'll be writing these sets of tweets, this data set, to the configured Kafka topic. And so really easy way to go from building a data set, building kind of this custom data feed, and sending it along to a system, and then also having that become a scheduled sort of export. So this was all dealing with API content. I think the other thing that the Crul can do that's pretty cool is dealing with web content, so web pages. So an example of what that might look like would be this Hacker News web page. So if we look at Hacker News, a really simple sort of breakdown of titles and links, and about as simple a page as you can get. But it's a good example for showing what we can do with Crul with these web pages. I can run this open command instead of an API command. And essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to open up this web page in a browser tab. We have kind of a browser cluster. And we're going to open up this web page. We're going to fulfill any network requests and render any sort of JavaScript. And then we're going to turn that page into this tabular structure that is kind of each element on the page enriched with things like their parent-child relationships, the dimensions on the page, a few other things that allow us to process this data a little bit better. And then from here, I can search this data just like I did with the API responses. So as an example, if I wanted to get just a list of all the titles that exist on the page, I could start by first finding this first title. So I'll look for keyword of Apple. And this will give me just the elements on the page that contain this keyword of Apple, essentially. And I can look through the results and find the element that is just the link, or sorry, just the title that I'm interested in. And just by looking through here, this is the only one that is just the title. So I can look through the elements on this page, or look through the values in this row, and I can add them as filters to my query. So I'm looking for anything that kind of has this value or this value, or I guess I should say, and that value. Then if I get rid of that Apple search, this filter is now going to get back all the titles that exist on the page. And just like with the API example, I can run a table command to just extract out particular columns. So now I get back this really simplified sort of title, link, breakdown of posts that exist on Hacker News. And what's cool is because we have access to the browser, we can do things like take a screenshot. So if I were to run the same query but provide this screenshot flag, what this is going to do is take a full page screenshot, but because we know the dimensions of the elements on the page, in addition to this full page screenshot, we also have these cropped elements essentially that exist on the page. So we get a visual breakdown of what our filter was. And then the last thing I'll show is related to how we kind of do that for loop expansion that I demonstrated with the API example with the web content. And it works exactly the same with the web page. So as an example, I'm going to take this web page, which is full of useful links, and I'm going to filter down to just links to the actual comments on the page. So each of these is essentially representative of more data, more content that we have to navigate to that link to get to. So this is kind of where the crawl or a configurable or customizable crawl comes from. So what I can do is I can pass it into this open command, this exact same command, but I'm going to pass in this this link token, this attributes.href, and I'm going to open up all of these tabs at essentially the same time and filter on a particular aspect. So I'll open up the page, I'll turn it into that data set for each page, join them all together, and then I can filter on them all together and get back a list of all of the comments that exist on Hacker News. So I'm starting using the homepage as an index, and then I'm expanding on all of the links in that index and getting back a representation of all the comments. And this is the same sort of, I can take kind of the same sort of concepts as with the API example and save this as a scheduled query. Maybe I want to write these comments to an S3 bucket or something like that. But really the most important thing here is we can interact with a web page and do kind of those expansions in the same way as we did with an API. So really high level overview, there's a lot you can do with Crul. It really depends on what your use cases are, what kind of data you're trying to aggregate and process and deliver somewhere else. But hopefully that gives you an idea of what you can do with Crul.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think I had mentioned to you earlier before we went on live is that what's cool about your tool is that for the kind of work that I do in particular, because I teach data science and I do a lot of, I would say I live by data science. So I use data science to make decisions. Is I always want to do like an ad hoc query on something. And sometimes the data set is just not fun to deal with. And what I like about what you're building is that you could in this situation, like very quickly, grab, I think I saw almost 2,000 comments. It's like, hey, I'm going to grab like fresh, like high quality comments, because Hacker News has pretty good moderation, and where the comments are generally fairly high quality. And so you could just get, I need to enrich some, Hugging Face pre-trained model, and I want to do some fine tuning, and like, here we go. Here's some data. Let's go ahead and try that out.
Yeah. And I think one of the cool things that we've built in is there's a lot of caching at the different layers. So, when we kind of are running those different stages, each of those will get cached, and it makes it really easy to run exploration. So you can run a quick filter, and if it works, then that's great. If it doesn't, you can rerun it, and you don't have to make all the network requests again. It'll basically cache those for a period of time while they're in use, which makes it really easy to, for example, get a data set, filter it on something, try and sum things together, try and enrich it in some way without having to, basically wait a long period of time for the actual data to be generated, since you can operate off that cache while you're developing. So it's a lot of fun to use. It's just a ton of fun. I wrote a query a couple days ago that was looking at NBA teams and their travel schedules. So pulling from an API that had these travel schedules, I was bringing that in, then I was kind of simplifying it down to just the airport code, where they left from and where they're going to. And then I ran that through a climate API that basically calculated the carbon footprint of a team's, or an NBA team's travel schedule. So I haven't run it for all the teams yet, but I'm looking forward to figuring out which team has the largest carbon footprint. But things like that are cool. Kind of.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, what's kind of interesting about what's happening right now with programming is that, at least from my perspective, I've seen automation happen every 2 years or a year. There's some huge automation trend, and every time people are like, oh no, all the jobs are going away. It's like, no, they go. There's exponentially jobs created, because it just makes what you do at a different level. And where I see a lot of the world headed over the next couple of years is higher level tools, which allows you to get deeper insights. And Copilot is one of the ones that in particular that I think is going to catch a lot of people by surprise, because it's so good. I was just today using it to write some code, and I would say it makes me somewhere between 5 to 10 times more productive, and I'm already very productive. And so then same thing with a tool like yours is like, if somebody already is an expert at querying data sets and all this stuff, and then they strap on a tool like what you have, it's like they could really get something interesting, very quick. And then if you then combine Copilot with a tool like that you're building, that lets you query things. I could see, like, for example, someone that's a journalist at New York Times, or something like that. They could have someone that would use your tool essentially like all day long. It's like anytime like a news topic comes up, they get in there, they just start doing like data journalism. And they like, for example, the big one was the FTX,
Mhm.
the I think I'm not 100%. Is this the biggest fraud in history? Did it surpass Madoff? I thought
I'm
it.
not sure, but
Yeah,
it's a
I don't
big
know
one.
how many billions he stole, but and it'll all get sorted out. But that like, so I could see a journalist like, boom, let's get into Twitter, and they pull up a bunch of queries, and then boom, let's get into Hacker News, let's pull a bunch of queries, and then whatever, I don't know, maybe they could do some queries against I do almost nothing with crypto, so I don't know all the APIs, but like there's probably some cool crypto APIs where you could see like weird stuff going on, and then you start like coming together with a story, and the story you told as a data journalist could just be so much more interesting because you could just move quicker.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's something we've leaned into. There's a lot of people that are immensely skilled at building up models, ML models, or analyzing data, or writing about data, and a lot of times just the aggregation of that data, and the processing of it, and just getting it to a stream processor, or getting it to another tool can be painful, especially for kind of these, maybe they're smaller data sets, maybe they're low volume but high value data sets, and yeah, we wanted to build something to kind of enable a wider audience of people to be able to interact with that data. I mean, I didn't talk too much about the templatization of these queries, but a lot of them can be turned into templates. They can be turned into simplified forms. We're looking to build a query library that would allow you to, if you want to get a data set, that there may be a query already for that, and then you'll be able to change it a little bit. Maybe you want to, rename a column. Maybe you want to filter a particular value out, or something like that. But being able to drop back into the query, we've seen is quite valuable. So yeah, we're really excited about what we've built, and happy to share it.
And are people going to be able to, I guess, use your products and then also buy like a pro version of it anytime soon?
Yeah, so things are still a little bit in flux, but I think our initial goal is to have a desktop application. So similar to a Postman, kind of something you use maybe when you want to get data from a web page, or when you want to get data from an API, and turn it into a CSV, or write it to a bucket or something like that. We want to build a desktop application for that. For more enterprise use cases, I should say that that desktop application will have certain features turned off. So things like scheduling don't make a ton of sense on a desktop app, but they're very useful for productionizing, or creating kind of these pipelines that are continuously running. So those will be more part of an enterprise offering that will kind of have a bunch of different ways to distribute. If you want to run it, if you want us to host it, we're doing that right now. If you want to host it yourself, we'll have an AMI, or we'll have a binary. So we want to leave a lot of flexibility as to how you actually deploy it. But as far as the short-term distribution, it'll be a desktop application that you can fire up whenever you kind of need it, and essentially get data from the web and send it elsewhere.
Yeah, and I could see how too that using your experience from Splunk is going to come in very handy. We had talked a little bit about this before, but that I've was a fan of Splunk when it first came out, and I've personally set up some pretty complex Splunk setups. Like I was at a telecom company, and we had, I don't know how many terabytes of data going into this thing, but like it was multi-region Splunk, data centers in North California and Southern California and in the East Coast. And
Mm.
what Splunk to me really did well was give you I guess kind of like a God tool, where you're like, whoops, we're in big trouble. And everyone's panicking and you're like, okay, let's pull out the God tool. And then you get into the God tool and you're like, okay, what's wrong? And then it's like, you do a few queries, and you're like, uh-oh, yeah, so we have this issue, and it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the database is corrupt, or, there's like 3 nodes down. Whoops,
yeah,
So
yeah.
so I could see like the same kind of a thing where what's nice about these high level languages like this that are query based is that you can get right into the heart of the problem very, very quickly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I love Python. I love using the CLI. I love writing little scripts and things like that. But even in my own, even for just little things where I want to transform a CSV or transform a JSON object or something like that, I sometimes find myself uploading the file to Crul and using the language because um, it's a pretty cool language to use. It's yet another language to learn, but I think it has a lot of power for dealing with APIs and kind of solving problems that you might have to write a script for, and being able to solve it really quickly through some of the abstractions that we built into the language.
Cool. And maybe another topic that would be kind of fun to talk about is whether you're thinking of basically a model of kind of more of a indie model versus a go big model. Any thoughts on like how you're going to work on this product over the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, Carl and I, we knew what we wanted to build. We talked together for a while, and we thought about some of the problems that we wanted to solve, and we knew kind of what we wanted to build, how we wanted it to look, and how to operate with it. So we spent the last year and a half, bootstrapped, just building what we wanted to build, and we've gotten to the point now where we have a tool that has some that has product capabilities, and we're working towards how to turn it into basically a business for Carl and myself. And I think we're exploring a bunch of different ways to do that. I think the initial distribution, we want to get it in people's hands. We want kind of that initial distribution to be freely available and have kind of an upgrade path. We want to have enterprise offerings as well, where if you want to run this as part of your data ingestion pipelines, or maybe it's just a tool that you use in your day to day, we want to support that as well. As far as building a huge company out of this, I think our goal is kind of get as many people using it rather than anything else. I think if we have people using Crul who enjoy using Crul, and we can build a community and build a great product around that community, those are Carl and I's priorities. And yeah, I think we have a lot of go-to-market thinking and details to iron out to make this something that we can. We're not bootstrapping forever, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it definitely. I mean, from the demo that I've seen, I believe many people would want to use the Crul um, language, and especially if it's easily downloadable with like a desktop app. I could see that people in. I mean, there's a lot of people in data science programs. I mean, a staggering amount of people in data science programs. That the one of the bigger problems is if you want to make a name for yourself, do you use Kaggle or maybe Hugging Face data sets? But then everybody's got those data sets, like so like but if you create your own data set, then you can really do an awesome portfolio project, and it makes you stand out. And especially now that it looks like we're in a dark recession for 2 years. Who knows? I mean, I'm not an economist, but I've seen multiple big recessions, and all the signs are here. that having portfolios in particular is a critical way to get hired.
Yeah.
So I could
Yep.
see that as a pretty strong use case for people, as they want to build a great data science portfolio, and they just collect their own data sets. And so from the kind of adoption standpoint, I could see a lot of people really being interested.
Yeah. I think that's that's important to us, being able to either accelerate people who maybe have the skills to do this, but they'd rather spend their time actually operating on those data sets, or just enable people who maybe don't have the time to learn how to create Python scripts or something like that, and create kind of templates to make things easier, but also allow you to drop in and use a simplified sort of language. So yeah, that definitely resonates a lot, and I think we'd love people to try it out, build their own data sets, see what kind of cool things they build on top of those data sets, and yeah.
The stuff that I think that's interesting in the next year is that there's a few trends that I see that are going to be interesting. So one of them is the AI pair programming era is here. Like the lawsuits around Copilot, I'm like, I don't know about that, but like, they're a little strange to me. Like, why, of all the problems we have in the tech world, this is the one people are really up in arms about? It seems like it's a useful tool, but there's Amazon has a pair programming tool called Code Whisper, which I've tried out. There's an open source one now with Hugging Face that they're working on. There's going to be like 10 of these, right? The people are building these tools. So that's one thing we're going to see, which is people are going to get a lot better at writing code. Another thing is the cloud-based development environment, I think, is here to stay. And I think we're at the spot where it's going to be very difficult for people to justify like doing a ton of stuff on their laptop anymore. I think their laptop, you'll want one that's like decent, but if you can get a $5,000 GPU with code spaces, or a 16 core machine with 100 gigs of RAM and 200 gigs of storage, there's some insane machines that are available that are like extremely low cost that you can just rent for like 30 minutes, and then even have a one-to-one mapping with the project you're working on. That I think is going to be a very disruptive change. So we got that. And then the other stuff that's happening is there's voice controls as well, where there is. I don't know if you saw the stuff they're doing with GitHub, where you can basically talk and code comes out. That. So essentially, what I see is all this stuff is converging on just higher level tools, which don't destroy jobs. I think they actually create more exponentially more jobs in the short term. I don't know about long term, but like in the next 5 years, that there's just even more opportunities for people to dig into it. And so, any thoughts on that? Some of the automation that's happening, and maybe how it informs your thinking about the stuff you're building.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm less familiar with, to be completely honest. But I do think it's very exciting. I do think that it enables more people essentially to be able to write code essentially, and even if the code is abstracted away a couple levels, it's kind of filling the same use case, and over the course of computer science history, there's always new abstractions coming. So it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily particularly new, but I think it's a pretty exciting stage. I hadn't heard of the GitHub one where you can speak and code comes out. I think that's pretty exciting. I think the way we think about it is it really goes back to allowing people to get data from web content without having to deal with these patterns of API keys and scheduling and writing to third parties and credential management and things like that. those abstractions, at the end of the day, they get turned into code, whether it's something that you create yourself or using different products that you kind of chain together. And so I think it's not kind of an auto-generated code. It's not a code generator, but it operates in a similar way in that it's abstracting things away. So it'd be very cool to kind of look into further integrations and see if we can work with things like Copilot to simplify certain common operations.
Well, I mean, if you, one of the things that's interesting is if you look at like what a software engineer does, and like, let's say you're just a Python software engineer, that you're going to write boilerplate code. Let's say you're using a microservice framework like Fast API, or you're using Flask or something like that. Like, essentially there's the logic and then there's the boilerplate code. And in some cases, the boilerplate's like 80%. And it's just completely useless time in some sense. It's similar to what you're doing. So in a way, Copilot, I think, is very complementary to what you're building, because what I think one of the most misunderstood things about Copilot, and I would encourage people to use it, is that it's like, oh, blah, 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 it does this and this and this. It's like, no, what it does is, if you're already a competent programmer, the stuff that you don't want to write, that you like, I've written in my life, I don't know, 10,000 command line tools, 20,000, 25, I don't know how many thousands of command line tools I've written in my life in multiple languages. But do I really need to write again the boilerplate code to write the command line tool? Or is what is important is the logic, right? Like, oh, I need to build this, and then I'm the person that's got to decide what logic, right? I have to say, hey, open a file, extract the words out of here, do this and this and this. And that's the part that's the creativity. But the boilerplate stuff, it just goes away with a tool like Copilot. And similarly with what I like about what your tool does, or your system, is that it just gets out of stuff that's really not important, right? I mean, like, like you're now getting to the important things, which is, now let me find out some interesting information.
Right. Yeah. And I think, at least in my experience, the thing with that boilerplate code is, it can be extremely time consuming when it doesn't work. All of a sudden you're kind of deep in GitHub issues, or you're kind of looking through these open source projects, or digging through Stack Overflow, trying to figure out why, these abstractions aren't working. Or I can see how removing that boilerplate is also kind of reducing the complexity of what you're actually trying to build, because you only focus on the business logic, essentially. So
Yeah, it's like, there's useful suffering, and
yeah.
which is meaningful, and then there's useless suffering. And a lot of programming is useless suffering, where, like, it's like, oh wait, why is this list not parsing correctly? Oh, it's a tuple. Oh, like just dumb stuff that's like, oh, why do I have to do this? Or and so I was going with this, is that the boilerplate is one, and then this is where I think the cloud-based is also subtle, in that, people really are not paying attention enough, I think, to why it's so important, is that if you want to build a production system, you build in the same environment that you deploy to, right? So you have essentially a container that's exactly what your production environment is, and then there's nothing to do. Like, you just have a container that is in fact the same thing that goes into production. And then it gets rid of all these weird things. You're like, oh, wait, so I did homebrew install here, and then like it linked to this weird C library, now it doesn't work. And so that, I think that's where also, if you start to put these things together, they're actually all complementary, right? It's like, oh, so I don't ever have to worry about installation anymore. Oh, so I don't ever have to worry about deployment anymore. Oh, I don't have to worry about boilerplate code anymore. And you start kind of putting this stuff, and then once because they take up so much intellectual effort, that it's hard to know, how much work it really is until you get rid of it. And then you get rid of it and you're like, wow, I actually can do really cool stuff. I'm pretty smart. Like I
Mm,
can do, like so I think that's what's exciting in a way about the new era we're in, is that these are not actually, these kind of high level tools are not like damaging. They're actually regenerative, so you can spend time doing really cool stuff.
yeah. I think people have spent enough time building things to recognize, what the patterns are, what's the thing you're doing the same every single time, and starting to just build up the abstraction tree, and simplify those things, or maybe even remove those things that are the same every time.
And one use case that I see for your product, in addition to the stuff we already talked about, is Hugging Face. Have you played around with it a little bit?
Not too much, but I am familiar.
So one of the things that would be interesting for people to do to make themselves stand out, and that's why I think I'm very curious about when you're going to release your product so people can use it. I think a lot of people would use it like tomorrow. Is that one way to make yourself stand out would be to create your own data set that was put into Hugging Face data sets. So it's still in a sense like a greenfield. Like I actually, believe it or not, was on Twitter when there was like almost nobody on it. Like there was like 10,000 users, something like ridiculous. There was
Mhm.
like nobody on it. And I actually had like a following and everything. And I was like, I don't like this. I just deleted my account. And it's kind of like the same thing though, where um, in terms of Hugging Face, like you could get in very early and start to create like data sets around certain things that you're the person that created the data set. And if they use your tool, it's obviously going to make it a lot easier to create a data set. And then once you got the data set, first of all, you're going to get, people are going to know who you are because you created this really cool data set, and maybe that gets you a job. And then the second one is, now you can actually build an app using that data set, using Streamlit or Gradio, and then host it on Hugging Face. So I also see to me, what I see with your tool is a triangle between GitHub, Code Spaces plus Copilot, and Hugging Face. I think your tool fits right in there, like a very nice synergy.
Yeah. I mean, we're really excited to get it out there, and see how people use it. I think we're going to have to build a lot of content, build data sets, build queries, write blogs, and show kind of what we can do with Crul. But with such an open-ended product, I mean, I think it's going to be so exciting to see what people build with it, what kind of data sets they generate. And once you've generated the data set, you can kind of do the fun part, and do the analytics on top of it. So that's going to be exciting to see as well, what what people build on top of what they get out of Crul.
Maybe to shift gears to Splunk for a second. Are there any projects that you worked on that you're allowed to talk about that were like unique projects, or really cool things that you did with Splunk that maybe left an impression on you, and you still think about every once in a while?
Yeah, there's a couple. So I worked on an open source project called Trumpet,
Hmm.
something I built based off of kind of somewhat similar requirements, which was just the difficulty of configuring AWS to send
Wow.
data to Splunk, and really it's a lot of data lakes or data analytics tools. Getting data out of systems can be challenging. So what Trumpet would essentially do is you would provide a few details about your Splunk environment, and then it would spit out a CloudFormation template that you could deploy in your AWS environment that would collect data from CloudTrail, um, AWS config, some of the security services, things like that. All of it was kind of configurable within the Trumpet tool. Spit out the CloudFormation template, which you could run. And then once you finish running it, you would have data streaming into your Splunk environment. So
Hmm.
really like a 2 or 3 click way of essentially getting data from an AWS environment into a Splunk environment. We built something similar with GCP that would create a Terraform template. That eventually turned into a project called Grand Central, which was fun to work on. It was kind of a convergence of both of those. And we were working on Azure and things as well. That would essentially, it was essentially a Splunk application where you could provide some of those details and configure these data collections. And it was particularly cool once we kind of brought it all together, because all of a sudden we could configure multiple different AWS accounts. So when you're dealing with accounts that are spread across business units, or maybe they're geographically separated or something like that, we could configure the data collection aspect from one particular place. Maybe you want to turn CloudTrail on in one environment, or you want to collect from CloudTrail in one environment, maybe you don't in another one. But that was a project I really enjoyed. It kind of started with Trumpet. And there were a few other projects, but that one was particularly cool, just in that I kind of got to own it end to end, and we got to open source it, and it was a pretty useful tool.
Yeah, so I mean, I could see how that experience is going to come in pretty handy with your new tool, because basically, that could be a huge use case, right? Is somebody has an AWS account, and maybe they want to do some queries right across the APIs. Is that one of the things you're thinking?
Yeah, we're looking into working with like the AWS APIs and the GCP APIs. Once you get that data and it's in that tabular format, and you can do sort of filtering operations and query that API as if it was a data set, and do things like expansions, it's really nice, especially within cloud providers, which have kind of these hierarchical structures to begin with. So you can make initial requests to, for example, list out projects in the GCP environment. And then from that list of projects, you can then expand into each project, and maybe you want to get pub subtopics that exist in every single project. And so you can do this expanding sort of query within Crul and get back a listing of all the topics that are running. And then you could do follow-on requests. Maybe you want to see what the status of those topics are, or something like that. But it works really well with kind of starting from a particular point, expanding on it. Whenever you have these hierarchical structures, like in a cloud provider, the API exploration is a lot of fun, because you get this tabular structure that you can just expand on and really explore, like truly explore.
Yeah, what's interesting is I could see how you could let's just take Twitter for example, because I had mentioned to you before that I, not on this stream, but off of it, that I'd spent several years doing stuff with Twitter and different social media platforms, and it's just a pain, right? Because I had to enrich the data and label it and all kinds of weird stuff, and do mechanical Turk jobs and run machine learning jobs and all this stuff. But what's cool about the Crul tool is that you could actually, really quick, if you had an AWS account, just set up some kind of experiment and collect a bunch of data, throw it into S3 as a destination. Then once it's in S3, you could of course schedule it, get it going. Then you're like, okay, now let's move to a different part. And then you go and you take the same tool, right, which you're comfortable with, and now you go back into maybe S3, and then now you start working on the S3 part, and you go, hey, you know what? Let's put this into, I don't know, like Redshift or Dynamo or something. And then you could you could basically just keep using this high level tool to like essentially migrate the problem to higher and higher level tools. So like, even though it itself is a high level tool, it could be used to create higher level tools. And I think that's an interesting concept, is to be able to like start with something that's very ephemeral, and then slowly narrow the problem down using the exact same tool.
Yeah, and that's something we've embraced. We haven't built an analytics platform, we haven't built a dashboarding tool, we haven't built an alerting framework, or any of those kinds of those kind of highest level concepts. But what we've seen, or at least our experience has shown, that actually just getting the data in can be pretty hard sometimes, especially if it's not like a plugin or an existing sort of existing sort of integration with any of these, stream processors or alerting platforms or anything like that. And so we've just embraced that, and it's like, we'll just get the data to where you want to work with it. And we want to simplify the process of actually getting that data. But we think that our language is a pretty good start.
Cool. Yeah. That's a pretty good context. Yeah. So I'm gonna make sure that we put this into an interview series that I'm doing on O'Reilly around enterprise machine learning operations. And to me, what enterprise machine learning operations isn't necessarily like super fancy full self-driving cars or anything like that. It's actually very boring stuff, which is that you have something that was experimental and you don't make it experimental anymore. You make it a production system by creating automation. And one of the things in particular that is a pretty big part of the problem with machine learning, and I think there's a lot of different studies that have talked about this, but 80% of the problem is actually the ingestion of the data plus ETL, right? And then also creating some kind of like a feature type repository. And there's some pros and cons about whether people should use feature stores or not. But the core concept is you have data that's messy and you need to clean it up. So I do see also your system definitely, becoming potentially an interesting tool for people that are into MLOps and they want new data and I think fine tuning especially is one of the areas that's becoming very, very interesting for multiple reasons, fine tuning machine learning models. And one of the reasons is that I'll just list a few examples. So one is that it's not possible to train a model with the same resources that a large tech company has. Like, I mean, you're not going to have 100 GPUs that are $10,000 a piece. Like nobody does, right? Like, so you have to, if in some scenarios there is no choice, you have to use their model. The second is that, now people that are involved in crypto don't care about this, but many people do care about carbon footprint. And it's in some sense does make you scratch your head. Like, why am I training a machine learning model worse than the big tech company did? Why don't I just use the thing that they created and then fine tune it? And that's actually one of the use cases for fine tuning is actually to lower your carbon footprint. And then the third is the expertise involved in fine tuning a model is much less. So there's several different reasons for there's more, but like those are a few of the reasons. And so for people that are especially that are interested in fine tuning, that having more tools around cleaning the data and automating the cleaning of the data and ingesting it into a repository, they're looking for tools like this. And so I do think the category that your tool is in, which is, I guess it would be in a sense like there's AutoML, but there's also like auto data. Like it would be like auto data wrangling, right? Like, and so I see for people doing machine learning operations, they should really look at your tool because I'm sure it's going to be out pretty soon. And it could be the kind of system that would really help them, get better at machine learning operations, because really, as I mentioned, machine learning operations is just automation.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if anyone wants to try this out, like feel free to reach out and we'll happily set you up. We're going to do kind of a wider release in the next month or so. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. We've seen some success working with machine learning SMEs and sort of analytics teams that are trying to just prototype different data sets, and they don't necessarily need a super high fidelity stream or really high volumes of data. They're interested in just enriching an existing data set or enriching an existing model with some data. And yeah, Crul can work really well for that because it simplifies that data piece.
So in terms of people getting a hold of you, and then also maybe getting access to a demo, or they want to pay you. They want to. Maybe you're an enterprise hedge fund, or you're an environmental company or journalist, or something. You want to try this thing out and get a jump on it. Like, how would they get a hold of you and give you money, or download it, or just get more information?
Yeah, so I mean, you can reach out to myself, Nick at Crul.com. We also, our webpage will be updating in the coming weeks, but our webpage does have a kind of a help request button where you can reach out to us and just let us know kind of what you're interested in, and we'll get back to you straight away.
How do you spell that?
Sorry, what?
Your webpage? What is the?
It's Crul.com, CRUL.com.
Okay, CRUL.com.
Yeah,
Oh, that's an easy to remember name.
Yeah, we got one of those little chat icons, but it doesn't make any noises or pop up in your face. So you have to click on it to reach out. But if you're interested, like, absolutely do reach out. We'd love to talk to you and love to give you a demo. Love to hear about your use cases. Love to set up either a demo environment or get you some early access or something like that. But
cool. Well, yeah, it was great talking to you, Nick, and I'm sure a lot of people will reach out to you, and I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon.
Likewise, no, this was a lot of fun.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later.
Right. See ya.
Bye.